All right, I think we can start. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me during this session. I'm Simon. I work with Couchbase on the Java SDK and also on all projects connected to Spring. So today I'm going to talk about Couchbase and Spring integration and mainly Spring Data. Yeah, Couchbase. Show of hands, who knows about Couchbase? Okay, quite a few people. And welcome to those who don't know about Couchbase. Maybe Memcached? Memcached is an older in-memory cache solution. We know Spring Data? Yeah, just joking. A little bit of history first. So, what is Couchbase? Couchbase is a NoSQL data store that is both a document-oriented data store and a key-value data store. So it's a project that inherits from, is a hybrid between two projects, which are Apache CouchDB for the document-oriented side of things, and Memcached, as I was saying before, which is a cache key-value kind of store. And on top of that, it added various features like for the cache, replication, and persistence to disk, that sort of stuff. So it's originally a hybrid of the two solutions, and then it goes beyond that by adding new features. And there is a community edition, and then an enterprise edition with support. But you can very well use the community edition in your projects. About the Java side of things, we have various SDKs with Couchbase that allow you to talk to the database using your favorite language. But the Java SDK was recently completely rewritten to have a more reactive base. And we talk about the 2.x series. And we also had a Spring Data connector for the older client, but it was quite limited. There was some things that you could do. You could do CRUD repositories and all that stuff, but it was basically just it. And recently, on the server side, we introduced with the Couchbase 4 release a new query language called Nickel, N1QL. So it's a superset of SQL. And so in Couchbase, you store your documents are JSON. And with Nickel, you can query your JSON with a single index, primary index in the sense of Nickel. You can do a select, and it's the same syntax as SQL. It's basically a superset of SQL. We have a few additional operators to deal with JSON arrays and JSON objects, but it's basically SQL. So SQL is back in the NoSQL world. And that's interesting from a Spring Data perspective because now we can do things like generate Nickel statements out of the name of your repository methods. So that's the tie-in with Couchbase and Spring. That's basically query derivation. So query derivation is the feature in Spring Data where you declare a repository interface and you declare a method signature for this repository, like find all by age greater than and an integer parameter. And the backing store connector will generate a statement, a query for you that matches this method automatically. So you don't have to write SQL or in GPA or write Mongo queries or write Couchbase Nickel. So the Nickel connector, the Couchbase connector now supports that. Previously, the only way of querying a repository with the 1.4 Couchbase connector was through views. So views are the historic querying mechanism from CouchDB. And it's basically a map reduce function that runs on your cluster. So you have to think about how you will actually query your data. So if you want to query by name, you have to create a view that emits the name of each document. And if by chance you stop worrying about the name and instead wants to do some surname search, you have to write a new view, basically. So yeah, query derivation is quite nice to have, and it was enabled thanks to Nickel. So in Spring Data, in the new generation of Spring Data, you can do that. You could also write handcraft Nickel queries as well. So if you put an @query annotation on your method and then provide inline a statement, a Nickel statement, it will execute this one instead of trying to generate something for you. And we provide help because, yeah, one key thing to keep in mind is Nickel is schemaless. Couchbase is schemaless. And as such, if you have like a repository of users and a repository of cars, both entities could be stored in the same bucket, in the same backing database, basically. So you have a mix and match of documents. And if you just take all the documents from the database, you could come up with a car where you were searching for a user, which wouldn't make sense. So you have to, when you do the select queries, you have to filter on the type attribute that Spring Data automatically injects. And when you do query derivation, we take care of that for you. But if you actually write the statement yourself, then there is spell support, SPEL support, and there is a dedicated Nickel variable in spell that allows you to easily add a where clause with the filter on the entity type. So yeah, we try to give a good usability even if you want to write your own queries yourself. I can do a quick demo of what I just said. So let me switch quickly to IntelliJ. Is that readable? It's very small, but so here we have a domain object, an entity, which is a coworker. So a coworker has an ID, which is it will translate to a key in a document key in Couchbase. It has a name, a description, various other attributes. So Couchbase, Spring Data Couchbase will serialize that, store that by using the key, the ID @ID as the key of the document. And then the content of the document will be the JSON corresponding to all the other fields, basically. So when you look at the document, if I go to an example here, I have a coworker. And if I look at it, this is the Couchbase web console that comes with the solution all the time. If I look here, I see that there is no ID, basically. The ID is that document key. But it works quite well. Oops. Yeah. And then I have a coworker repository. And okay, I have a few things that are specific to Couchbase, but basically a coworker repository is just a Couchbase repository, or could be repository directly, of coworkers that are identified by a string, the ID. And here is a query derivation example. So find one by name and provide a name. This is automatically translated to a select star from default, where name equals the name that you provide. And you can do all sorts of stuff, like find all by team. Okay, this is starting to get long, but find all by team is and description contains basically means that you will do a select star where team equals the team name that you provide here as a parameter, and description contains it will translate to a like kind of clause. And here is the way of doing an inline statement. So I use the spell variable here that will generate the select from clause. And I use also the filter parameter that will generate the where clause to filter on entity types. And then I can do more advanced stuff in pure NQL, like only select documents that have an object that satisfies some condition. Okay. And last thing I wanted to show, so yeah, that's basically it for Spring Data, purely Spring Data. Okay. Oh, I have also a controller, but I will get to that later, that uses the repository directly for things like find all or find one by ID. Another thing that was kind of went GA in Couchbase 4.0, the server release, is geospatial view, or rather not geospatial, but multidimensional views. So these are views like the old way of querying in Couchbase, but with the notion of dimensions and performing range queries. And it goes beyond just geospatial data because it can go to any number of dimensions. So let's imagine that you have a location, like a shop information object with a location for the shop, and then opening hours. You could imagine that the third dimension of your view would be the opening hours, and that would allow you to do stuff like find shops in an area that closes or that have opening hours in a certain range, like it's open between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m., for instance. So we added another annotation for this type of queries, where you can specify which geospatial view to use for the backing of the query. And same as with NQL, it does query derivation. So you can do stuff like find shops within and provide a polygon area or a circle or stuff like that. Actually, Couchbase will do a bounding box approximation. So we approximate to the rectangle that englobes the polygon. And then on the client side, it will do eliminate the false positives. Couchbase only supports bounding boxes. But if it had to support polygons and circles, what it would do internally would be the same. It would be approximate the bounding box and then remove false positives, so only on the server side. Yeah, quick demo of that. So if I go back to my repository, here I have a dimensional annotation. So what I say is find all by main location, which has coordinates within a polygon or a circle, or which are near a point within like a certain distance, 10 kilometers or so. And I made use of that in the search controller. So I have an endpoint that says find everyone that is near some guy by his Twitter handle, for instance, or find team members. Oops, sorry about that. Find team members by team name that are near a coworker. So if I want to find everybody in my company that works on the core database and that are near me, like within the same time zone. Or even find people in a circle, like the circle around Barcelona within 10 kilometers, find everyone, all my coworkers that work in the area. So I can quickly show an example. Oop. And I don't have what? I won't show an example because the screen is too small. Ah, yeah. Okay, so if I search in a circle, yeah, the body of the search, it's a post. It's a center and a radius. So a circle in Spring representation. And we do a post on this API. And if we execute that, we get coworker 2, which is me, because the circle was around Paris, basically. And yeah, that translates to a query. That translates to a query to a geospatial view directly, without doing anything in particular. So that was using directly the repo method that I showed earlier. Another very important subject these days is Spring Boot. And I'm going way too fast. So yeah, Spring Boot has seen a huge adoption. And of course, we try to collaborate with the guys in the Spring Boot team to provide first-class support of Couchbase in Spring Boot. So here you can see that we have the oldish Spring Boot 1.3, the current GA version, actually. And here we have the 1.4 version of Spring Boot. Couchbase is integrated into 1.4. So that's, for now, it's milestone 3, but it's in terms of Couchbase integration, it's pretty stable, I'd say. So what does it mean? It means that we have support for the core of Couchbase. We have support for Spring Data Couchbase that I just showed you, with things like auto-configuration. So Spring Boot will select sane defaults for you and will let you tune some knobs by adding properties in the application.properties file or any other means of defining them. And yeah, when I say first-class citizen, it's really that we even try to separate Spring Data and the core of Couchbase. So if you happen to have the Couchbase SDK in your class path, without having Couchbase, Spring Data Couchbase, sorry, then Spring Boot will still configure the raw elements of the SDK, like the cluster, connection to the cluster, and the bucket object that has all the raw API, the SDK, native SDK API. So there is a Spring.Couchbase namespace of properties that you can use to tune that. Let's say you want to change the IP of the first node you want to contact, or you want to change the default bucket that you will use, set a password to use with that bucket, or even tune what we call in the Couchbase SDK the environment, which is where you tune the client. Like how many threads are dedicated for I/O, for instance, or that kind of tuning. So yeah, Spring Boot lets you first chooses sane defaults and then lets you tune them a little bit. And then if you have Spring Data on your class path, it will pick that up too, and it will auto-configure Spring Data. And of course, the two are tied, which means that it will reuse the bucket and cluster instances, the bins that it created for the core, and it will use them for Spring Data. Everything is tied. So let's have a quick look at the Spring Boot integration. So first, the application that I was showing you until now is a Spring Boot application. Here is the proof. And it starts by doing some creation of demo users. So I create a Jon Snow coworker. I create a Arya Stark coworker and Simon coworker. Oop, it's red, not good. And I use the repository, so I auto-inject coworker repository over there, and I use that to save these domain objects, these entities. So each of these will be translated to a Couchbase document and persisted to the database. Here I use the repo to find one coworker by its ID as well. Okay, so that's the bootstrap of the application. And then we have a coworker controller. So in the past API coworkers, I have a few CRUD methods that deal with coworkers. So this one, for instance, just returns the repository.findAll result. So if I go to API/coworkers/ I will get all the coworkers. We can do that. Yep. So yeah, that's another example. But if I do API coworkers, I see that I have Jon Snow, that I have Simon, and Arya Stark. And if I want to, for instance, create a new coworker, I can do a post with a tool like Postman. So I can post on API coworkers, the same endpoint. I will post this JSON, send, and it doesn't work. Demo effect, demo gods. Okay, that's because of the time zone. Anyway, moving on. Okay, I made a last-minute modifications and I didn't change the post request, but you get the idea. You can do put, you can do post, you can do all that stuff, and you can also use Spring Data REST, which is a project that automatically does that stuff for you. Here I choose not to, and I should probably have. But you can do that, and the underlying code is basically just using the repository. So you can also delete by calling directly the delete method on the repository. And you have, as I said, you have properties that you can configure. So here we have the core property, For instance, which node, which Couchbase node to hit for bootstrapping. So from that, it will interrogate the node and get the map of the full cluster. And starting from here, it will maintain this map updated and always talk to the correct nodes. And you have also other properties, like which bucket should you use? Is there a password for the bucket? The env dot something are tuning of the clients. So for instance, you could change the default timeouts for key value operations, that sort of thing. And we didn't expose everything because that's a Spring Boot philosophy. They are wary of programmation by configuration. So they want to only expose first to make choices for you, and also to only expose the few tunings, the few parameters that really, really make sense, like 80% of the time, and not try to cover 100% of an API. And then there is the Spring Data Couchbase namespace. So this one is more restricted, but you can choose, for instance, the default consistency that will be used for querying. You can choose to disable repositories if you're into that. And also, there is a nifty little feature that we put in Spring Data Couchbase, which is the auto-index feature, but we don't recommend you use it in production. Basically, it will take an annotation on the repository and generate the corresponding index for you. But that kind of stuff, our support usually says it's not a good idea to do that in production. There are some things, some corner cases could go wrong, but it's useful for tests, it's useful for demos and dev environment where you don't want to go to the console, create the index manually. All that is abstracted away by this. Okay, I think that covers it. All right. So that was Spring Data and Spring Boot, but there is also an integration of Spring Cache, both with Couchbase and Spring Boot. This is geocaching. Nothing to do with an actual cache. So we did an implementation of the Spring Cache abstraction for Couchbase. Couchbase is really good at caching, seeing that it came from a caching solution, memcached. So what we did is we added support for the Spring Cache abstraction, and we integrated that into Spring Boot as well. So in Spring Boot, you will, once again, it will reuse the same bucket, the same client that you declared, that Spring Boot declared for you. And it will allow you to select the Couchbase implementation for caching. And what happens is when you annotate with @cacheable, one of your service methods, Spring will capture the result of calling that method, and it will store it as a serialized result in Couchbase. And the key of the document in Couchbase will be very clear that this is from a cache usage and which cache name was used. I can quickly show that. So here I have Geo API key that I used, and also I configured in Spring Boot the type of cache to be Couchbase, and declared that there is a default set of caches, that one cache is automatically created called cities, And then we get a Couchbase specific configuration, which is that the document will expire in 60 seconds. So every 60 seconds, a cached document will expire, and we will have to talk to the API, the real API again. I have a Geo service. So here I have annotated my find city method with cacheable, and I refer to the name of the cache that I declared earlier. So I will basically say that every time find city is called with a city name and a country name, then I should first look into the cache, see if there is an entry that maps that corresponds to this particular request. If there is, deserialize it from Couchbase and return that. Otherwise, execute the content of the method. All of that is taken care of by Spring Cache Abstraction with a simple annotation. So this uses Google Maps, geocoder API, and it will try to resolve the location of a city given the city name, the city's name, and the country to look in. And then I have a geo controller, so uses the service and maps to city, country, /country/city. So here, if I go to the navigator and I go to cities, geo cities, and what was the country? Yeah. If I go USA and Berlin, okay. Did I make a mistake? API Geo, cities, city, that's why. Okay, so if I put in the correct URL, yeah, I was able to retrieve the location, the coordinates, like fuzzy coordinates of the city center of Berlin, USA. I also, since Google Maps returns me a well-formatted version of the name I provided, instead of USA, I get United States. And I also queried Google Maps, the time zone API, to get the offsets in hours from UTC. But the important thing is that if I go there, I see a Google Map query. So I actually hit my API. If I remove the console log and I go back to the method, it's almost instantaneous. And I see that I didn't make a call to the API. So what I add instead is a call to the database, and if I look into the database, if I refresh that, no way, it's already gone. Yeah, I'm not mad. Here we see that we have an entry, a document that starts with the cache prefix, the name of the cache, cities, and a simple key of Berlin, USA, which are the parameters that we use to query the service. So this is a serialized Java object, so we cannot edit it. It's like base 64 encoded. But this proves that the cache was, something was stored in the cache. And that's what you get when you query the endpoint again. And remember that in the parameters, we said expiry 60 seconds. If we go back to this page in 1 minute, this entry will be gone. And if we re-execute the query, we'll hit the API again. Okay. Right. So this is cache integration and Spring Data integration in Spring Boot. So a lot of new features since the previous generation, and I think that now Couchbase has become like really usable within a Spring Boot and Spring Data application. So I hope you will try it. Another thing that you can do is, of course, you can access the raw native SDK. So, for instance, one feature of the SDK that we added recently is the SubDocument API. So basically, this is a whole document, and the little part here is what we would refer to as a subdocument. The goal of this API on the server side is that instead of, if you want to make a small modification to a JSON document, deep within your document, you want to avoid to have to retrieve the whole document, mutate it on the client side, and then send back the whole document. If the document is really large, this basically wastes a lot of bandwidth. So SubDocument allows to do that. You will, given a document key, you will use a builder to say, okay, I want to just mutate this path in the JSON and execute that builder, and it will really save you bandwidth. And on the server side, all the updates will be done. It will manage optimistic locking, compare and swap, this kind of thing. So I thought there is no real equivalent in the Spring Data common framework for that, but it could make sense to map that to a controller with a patch verb, HTTP patch. So we could try to use that, and that's what I did to show how easy it is to get access to the native client and perform this kind of operations. So if I go back to my coworker repository, coworker controller. Here I have a more complex method that is mapped to the patch verb, and given an ID, it will receive JSON and translate that into a map. So that would be partial values for an existing coworker, and we want to only update the values that were given in the body. So if I want to change the name, I just add the name entry to the body of my request, and if I only put the name, only the name will be changed. So here I use a bucket, and bucket is basically the native client, and all I had to do is auto-wire it at the top. Because Spring Boot instantiated a bin for me, so I don't have to do any configuration, anything, just auto-wire a bin, access it, deal with it. With Spring Data, you could also get access to the native client by taking the repository, looking for the template method, get template, and on the template you will have a getter for the native SDK object, the bucket object here. So it's really easy. And then of course, once I have done all my builder, I execute it, and then I will get back to the repository to find the updated value and return that in the body. So if I go to Postman again, I have area Stark here, and if I do a get, so I did a get on a particular coworker, which is area Stark, and here you can see that the description of her location is home. And if I want to just change that, so I can switch to patch. in the body, I just put partial JSON, so I will change the main location. Within the main location, I only want to change the description and switch it to a girl has no home. If I send that, it updates the value here and says a girl has no home. And I can go to the browser and check, like, in the coworkers API, if I look for number 3, it's really updated in database. So yeah, that's the idea, like using a native feature of the client in your Spring application, even if there is no equivalent in Spring Data or anything. You can always go to the raw stuff and code more yourself. And by speaking of coding more yourself, all of this is an open source story. So you can also give the gift of pull requests. And we encourage you to tinker with all these implementations, raise issues on GitHub, pull requests on GitHub. All Spring projects are, of course, on GitHub, and it's really easy to contribute to the whole ecosystem, even if it's for documentation. Documentation are versioned in GitHub as well, even if it's for raising issues, finding problems. The Spring team is really, really helpful. There is a GitHub channel for help, Slack channel as well. So yeah, I really want to also encourage you, because this stemmed from us, from Couchbase. We saw that Spring Data was a good thing. Spring Boot was a huge thing. And we started this community implementation of the project. No one from Pivotal works on maintains the Couchbase connector right now. But you guys can also contribute, and we would be very happy if you did so. Yeah, that was my final notice. I hope you learned something and that you will want to try it and play with it. That's all for me. Thank you for your attention. Yeah, and I think we have time for a few questions. Yeah, 5 minutes for a few questions. Any questions? Yeah.
With the SubDocument API, can we change the arrays in the document, or you have to submit all the documents? If I want to remove
SubDocument, yeah, you can work inside arrays. You can append, prepend. You can delete a particular index.
Position.
Yeah, you can work with array indexes. Yeah, or the whole array.
And you can update by query inside the array and update the matches inside this array.
Update what? Sorry.
If I'm doing a query in the array, and I match 2 documents, and update only these 2 documents, it is possible to do it.
You mean like querying on array content?
Yeah, updating with only some the matches documents that exist inside the array.
Huh. I think that would be maybe a better job for Nicole. SubDocument is really about a single document. You know the key, and you will mutate data deep inside the document. Whereas Nicole can update conditionally some documents. So you could do update this document whose ID I got from another document. I think that was your, Any other question? Okay, well, thank you.